This morning, a push to cancel billions of dollars of medical debt in Connecticut. Governor Ned Lamont is proposing a plan that could possibly forgive your medical debt without you having to do a thing. Channel 3 Eyewitness News reporter Cassidy Williams is live in Hartford to explain how this would work. Good morning, Cassidy.
Good morning. And it's estimated 19% of American households have medical debt, and this proposal could change that. Ned Lamont, governor, will have a press conference later this morning to discuss the plan. Here's how it would work. Lamont is proposing the state use $20 million in federal COVID relief money to contract with a nonprofit that buys medical debt. That nonprofit would then negotiate with hospitals to buy medical debt at a fraction of its original cost, eliminating up to $2 billion in debt. There would be no application process to have your debt canceled. This plan is based off a model that has been used in other parts of the country. Lamont says this would help put millions of dollars back into the economy and provide relief to people. Critics on the other side of the aisle question whether the state would be purchasing debt that is uncollectible anyway. And this proposal is currently being considered by the General Assembly. That press conference with the governor and advocates is set to begin at 11 this morning. Live in Hartford, Cassidy Williams, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.